Good to go. All right. Okay.
Start the recording.
It's going. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Brisbane Azure User Group. If you're here for something else, not the place for you, but I say that every time.
That's good.
So welcome. It's a full half room, so that's great. This is being recorded. These mics are super sensitive. They'll pick up any conversation. Speak away if you want to be famous. So go for it. Brisbane Azure User Group. I got the month correct this time, so we're batting 1 for 1 so far. This may not continue. Before we get too far into it, big thank you for our sponsors, so Codify and Microsoft. So big thank you for those guys. So Codify for the beers and the pizza, and they help us so much, and Microsoft for the venue. So that's fantastic. Without this sponsorship, well, you probably wouldn't be having as good an experience with the pizza and the beer in the room. So community sort of engagement is critical to this group. So we are actively looking for people to contribute, and it doesn't have to be anything amazing. It doesn't have to be anything new. We're really after what your experiences are with Azure, because odds are, if you're having that experience, someone else is too. So absolutely welcome. Let us know. We've got an email down there. You can drop a line to that email. Dan is super awesome at getting back to you. So Dan's over in the corner there. and no doubt he will get back to you. And we'd love to hear any experience. And it doesn't have to be a full session. If you've got like a couple of minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, that'd be great too. We can sort of pair you up with some other people.
You don't even need PowerPoint.
You don't need PowerPoint. If you're doing PowerPoint, you're probably not a real developer. So onto my PowerPoint slides. We've got a few job opportunities. I'm going to hand over to Dan. He's going to talk about some opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for a new adventure, especially we've kind of reorganized things a little bit now. So it used to be, core business operations and platform engineering, and now we've kind of combined AI and engineering and data all together into one sort of operating division in Deloitte. So if you've got skills and passion in that area, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Deloitte's new Fabric team, I guess. Is that right?
Fabric?
Microsoft Fabric?
Yeah, I'm sure.
There you go. Awesome. Okay. So a few things. I don't have a huge amount here, so I won't bore you too much. There's a couple of things that have happened over the last month. There's actually a lot of really small changes, and I've kind of ignored a lot of stuff. So apologies in advance if I don't get to your favorite topic or something that you're super interested in. There was just a lot of noise. Upgrade policies for virtual machine scale sets. There's 3 different types of upgrade policies: automatic, manual, or rolling upgrade with max surge. Basically, production use the bottom one. The other ones used at your choice. Dev, you're probably using the top one. Pretty cool. Geo-replication for Azure Service Bus Premium. Don't really need to talk too much more to that. That sort of says it in the name of it. Give you a bit of an idea. There's some screenshots there. We got Azure Database for Postgres has gone GA. There were a few things that I noted. Kind of just bundle them up into the one slide here for everyone. Advisor recommendations. There's the version sync capability and online migration service. So if that's of interest, check it out. There's a link down the bottom to the article. Azure Databricks serverless compute gone GA. So you can now use some of that serverless compute if you've got Databricks that you're using. Want to take advantage of that. So that's for the pipelines, the jobs, and the notebooks. Down the bottom there, you can see 3 different articles. We've got cross-subscription load balancer. It's gone into public preview. So you can now split that up and load balance across subscriptions, different ways that you can do that. All right. So a few resources. So we've got our Slack channel, we've got our YouTube channel, and we've got our some training things. Oh, and I apologize. That may be an old slide that I put in there. I'll get a later one. So I think I like plugging John Seville. So he's great if you're looking at YouTube. It's not there. Oh,
There you go.
there we go. Apologies. All right. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bernie White. So Bernie White's a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. In this session, we're going to use Azure Infrastructure as code deployments and why this is a big leap forward. So running with Azure deployment stacks. Without any further ado, Bernie. Sorry. And while Bernie's setting up, oh no, he's good to go. So Bernie is the reason that I moved to Bicep so quickly. Without his constant support, I would never have made the move. But oh, there you go. PSRule and PSDocs.
Inventing, which is great.
Do you have a Bicep version yet? Really, Bernie? PSDocs?
No. PSDocs.
What did you move from the Bicep?
ARM templates. So I was a holdout on ARM. I thought it was amazing. I thought it did everything you needed. And it does. It's a little bit complicated compared to Bicep. So Bicep is just, why would you do anything else? And Bernie's going to let us know today.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So today we're talking about deployment stacks. So yeah, if you haven't met me, then feel free to scan a code or come up and talk to me later. We are going to be talking about deployment stacks. And I skipped ahead. But what is a deployment stack? This is sort of what the deployment stack looks like. So it's effectively a new resource type, but really you don't need to know anything about what's on this slide at all, because it actually is a lot more transparent than you would expect, right? This would be, if you're familiar with deployments through the command line, then this would be how you would do that through the Azure CLI, and this would be similar. Yeah, that's right, Azure CLI. And then this basically what you do with a stack, right? So you've got deployment, you pretty well changed deployment to stack, and you pretty well got a stack deployment, right? Super straightforward. There's a little bit more to it than that, which I'll go into obviously details around. But essentially, just by changing the command line that you're running, you'll actually start using stacks straight away. And then, that new resource type will happen, and all the additional features that are part of basically deployment stacks, you'll start to get as well, right? And so in this particular case here, it starts to then group these resources together in a collection. Similar to, I guess, some of the other, like methodologies that we have in Azure. But then specifically this one is really designed to treat that collection of resources wherever they're deployed, because they can actually be deployed across multiple resource groups as well, or different scopes. And then basically manage those as a single deployment unit. So for PowerShell, it's pretty well similar. So again, if you are doing PowerShell for either running this locally or in a pipeline, so most likely you're probably going to want to leverage this through infrastructure as code and deployment pipelines. Pretty well you can update your pipeline YAML or whatever you're using to deploy and add stack on the end for this one, right? And you're done. Cool. So deployment stack, pretty well, again, you take your regular deployment file. So again, this could be ARM or Bicep, no Terraform, sorry. But basically ARM or Bicep templates, you basically go ahead and run your command, which then creates a stack in Azure. And then that basically goes ahead and actually creates deployments for you underneath that, which are based on just how you've structured out your template anyway, and any resources that you've put within there. Cool. So pretty easy so far. Does anybody, I guess, feel like they shouldn't be adopting stacks at this point?
How does it work with the classic editor in Azure DevOps?
Classic, yeah, sure.
Works?
Yeah, you can run Azure CLI
Classic.
in Classic. Yeah.
CLI
Yeah.
rather than an actual.
So for Azure CLI to run it, if you want to run in like the classic build and release process, then there is a task for that.
For CLI.
Yeah, so as long as you're using a later version of the CLI, you're good. So I do have in the slides a specific version, but for Azure CLI, I think it's 2.61, something like that. But as long as you're using that version or greater, then you're good.
And
similar for PowerShell.
would it work with the ARM deployment task?
Would it work with the ARM deployment task? I would say no, because the Azure deployment task will pretty well run the CLI under the covers,
Yes.
but with then predefined commands. So you will probably need to use CLI at some point. There probably will also be a task at some point, but at the moment, then you definitely do it by the CLI, okay. Or Azure PowerShell. Cool. So let's have a bit of a look, and let's just see if we can jump across here. I just need to change my screen. Cool, that came across all right. And let's close that. Cool, so we've got our usual Bicep file. Let's go to this one. And so again, this is just a Bicep deployment. In this particular case here, we're deploying a resource group, and then we will deploy a storage account in the future. But at the moment, really, we're just deploying a storage account. So this is using a module, but again, that's just my preference about how I go ahead and deploy my Bicep code. But ultimately, if you just want to put resources in the file, go nuts. It's just like a normal deployment. So in this particular case here, we can go ahead and run. We can run this command. So we can obviously go ahead and run that from the command line. So if we go ahead and do az stack, and then if we go ahead and help on that, you'll see that then the next part is basically here are the scopes that we could deploy to. So this is almost identical to the deployment command. It's pretty well, the only thing that's missing there is tenant, because you can't deploy a stack at a tenant level, at least currently. And there are some, if you are doing a lot of deployments at management group scopes, there are some specifics with some of them, which I'll call out later, which you just need to be aware of when you're deploying at management group scopes. But apart from that, definitely a subscription scope and a resource group scope. It works exactly how you'd expect for the most part. So yeah, you would basically, if you wanted to do a resource group deployment, you would do group. And again, similar to the deployment command, you would actually see almost identical things in terms of creating, deleting, exporting, and listing, showing, validating. So very, very similar in terms of how you interact with it for all intents and purposes. For me, I've actually got a little cheat shortcut. So I'm just going to grab my my name of my resource group there, and I have a VS Code like link there that I can just go ahead and run that deployment. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit there, so I don't actually need to type the command line in, but the command line will look like this. And effectively, that's going to go ahead and deploy my stack. There is a few additional command lines in here you might notice, which I will talk about what they do and why you would use them in a sec. But essentially, this is going to, in my Azure portal, under subscriptions, because I'm actually deploying this at a subscription scope, and I'll explain why in a little while. There is a new section, if you haven't noticed, under here called deployment stacks. And so this exists on other scopes as well. So this will be under resource groups or under management groups as well. So normally your deployments would appear under here in terms of your deployment history. And right next to it is our deployment stacks. And so if we're quick, we can find that we've got one deploying here. And you'll sort of see it do its thing. It looks like it's basically done at this point, but it has some sort of like nice visualizations, which are a little bit different to a deployment per se. But essentially what it's doing here is it's saying, here are all the resources that are part of that deployment stack. And this changes based on obviously what the previous history is. So part of the deployment stack is knowing what resources I previously deployed as well. So previously, whenever we're talking about deployments in Azure, it was about, okay, well, here are the things that I'm going to deploy, go ahead, do them. But then it didn't really have, technically there was a deployment history, but you couldn't functionally use that or reuse that in any meaningful context later, right? It was just more of an entry of this is what I deployed, but you couldn't use that to your benefit in any way, in the future, right? Here, we'll sort of see what happens as a result. So should be succeeded. So it's deployed. You'll see that it actually has like its own like access control, which is a little bit different than a normal deployment as well. So there is some like additional capability here in terms of how it's treated as a resource. And there's a few additional settings here. We will talk a little bit more about those in a sec, but essentially we've seen here are the resources that are deployed under the covers. It's also spun off a deployment. So this is a separate resource. This is a normal deployment that you normally sort of see and expect. So again, it has, hey, this is what I deployed here. And if you've got sub deployments, which you do, then you'd obviously need to drill down to those to see each of the resources. Whereas the deployment stack pretty well is saying as part of the stack, then all of these things were deployed across, 1 to 10 deployments itself, right? Cool. So that's cool. So let's go ahead and now see what happens when we go ahead and add another resource. So in this case here, deploying a storage account, I'm going to do the same thing again and run my stack deployment. And then essentially, what we'll sort of expect to see is if we go to the resource group where this is deployed, obviously a storage account will appear and will be all good. But more importantly, the stack will also know, hey, I deployed this additional resource, right? This additional resource was added to the stack. So let's go back for a few moments. But does anybody have any questions?
In your resource group, the log alert rule, is that part of the stack? So
That's part of the stack, yeah. Yeah,
that's right, automatically then.
yeah, absolutely. So my my resource group module includes what I need in a resource group, which then also includes monitoring, right? So as a result, then if I go to...
So that's from the module, it's not part of...
It's from the module, yeah. So this is what my module looks like in terms of my resource group, which includes my resource group, right? Sorry. It also includes a lock, potentially, and also then the action group and whatever else I need, right? So let's jump back here and hopefully we are good with our stack, right? And you can sort of see now there's actually a few additional things in here, quite a few more than what we had. We also have our storage account, of course, and then we also have some resources under there. So effectively, they're just the blob configuration for the blob service and also the file service as well, which sit underneath the storage account. But you can sort of see them as actual resources as part of that stack. So if we go to our resource group, let's just double check it's all there. And it is, and you can't see the other things, but effectively they're sub resources under the storage account. Cool. So, so one of the, I guess, the cool things about a deployment stack is that it's keeping that history. It's sort of aware of what did I actually deploy. So one of the key benefits that you would get, obviously, about using Stack is that now you have some awareness of what resources I also need to clean up as a result. So if the stack updates, so I added a storage account just before, if I remove that storage account now from my deployment code, the stack will also reflect that within Azure. So it'll go ahead and basically perform an unmanaged action on that storage account. And so we actually have a few different actions we can perform, primarily just two, but there's combinations of them. So we can go ahead and delete, which basically sort of says, hey, if you have something in the stack and then you remove it from the stack, delete that resource, which is a perfect cleanup scenario, right? You can sort of say, you can restrict that to then sort of say, we'll only delete resources as opposed to resources and resource groups. Or you can say detach, which is sort of like what used to happen historically in a deployment, is that if it's in a deployment and then it's out of deployment, it still exists in Azure, but the stack doesn't really know about it anymore, right? So you've got basically choice on what you want to do, which is pretty cool because again, this solves the scenario of if I've got my deployment as being the source of truth, this is what I should have in Azure, and then I look at and see, well, is that actually what I've got in Azure? Historically, then with normal deployments that you would have done with the deploy command or the deployment command, then your deployment would be good. As soon as you remove stuff though from that deployment, it would still exist in Azure, and you wouldn't really then have any way to deal with it. You'd have to then go ahead and run like a CLI command or manually delete it from the portal or something like that to perform cleanup. Of course, you could also have automated actions to do that cleanup too, like periodically purge resources and things like that. But again, that's additional work that you don't really want to do, and is not really something that then is easily change trackable and things like that through source control and through the management of the deployment. So yeah, basically, when we go ahead, we can create a deployment stack. We want to do it at parent scope. And so the reason why we want to do it at parent scope is because this stack resource that sits underneath the scope that you deploy it. So I deployed my subscription, so it sort of sits underneath the subscription. If you deployed it down further on the resource group level, if somebody then has access to that resource group, they could also potentially remove the stack as well, right? So you want to push it at a scope higher than where you actually want to have your resources. In my particular case here, I'm actually creating the resource group and then the resources that are underneath it. So it makes sense to go ahead and put that up at the subscription level. Cool. At the end of the deployment, the ARM determines the unmanaged resources. So again, once the deployment process is finished, so if I go ahead and update my deployment now, which I will in a sec, it'll go ahead and do the deployment. And at the end of that, it'll go, hey, here are all the resources that didn't actually deploy through that process. So now we need to perform that unmanaged action on them, which would then obviously be delete or detach based on what you've said. Go ahead.
Hey, quick question for you. So what happens, and you might answer this later, so feel free to just tell me to wait. But what happens if it encounters a resource that already exists and you've got it in your code? Like, does it bring it into management, or what does it do in that situation?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, if you have a resource that's currently maybe in the same resource group, but not part of the stack, and then you add it to the stack, then effectively Azure will basically go ahead and perform any changes on that resource if the code is different from what's deployed. But then, yes, it will basically bring it into the stack. So it's very easy to integrate resources that are already there by basically just adding them to the deployment and now they're part of the stack. Okay. Cool. Great question. Deletion of the stack or unmanaged resources. So also, what happens when the stack gets deleted, right? So you might want to then at some point not have like hundreds of stacks with just empty resources with nothing in them, just there because they had to be there to clean up resources. You can actually also choose the action similar to the command lines that we've sort of seen before, is that when the stack gets deleted, what do? Do I just detach the resources and leave them in Azure, which is perfectly fine, right? Or do I go ahead and delete them and clean them up, which is potentially an action that you want, so then you don't have to clean up your resource group or whatever, right? Which is pretty cool. So let's have a bit of a look at that. So going back to our code, if we go ahead and start to remove our storage account to start off with, which, commenting is a great way to do that. Cool. And so you sort of see again on my my command line down there, then we do have those commands. So in this particular case here, we've got the action on our manage, delete all, right? So that would delete resources and resource groups. And then pretty well the yes is basically just saying don't provide a prompt, so just making it silent. And then we also have some deny settings, which we'll talk about in a sec. But that's essentially it. And so now it's going to do its thing, which it's a storage account. It should be relatively quick.
Bertie, another quick question. How reliable are you finding that delete? Because we know deletes have been a little bit unreliable in the past, especially on certain things. What does it do if it encounters like I don't know, like a key vault or something that it can't actually delete?
Yeah, so generally, like it like works the same as Azure in terms of I guess there are a few complexities that sort of get in the way, such as, hey, I've got a virtual machine that's plugged into a virtual network. I can't just remove the virtual network, right, before I've actually like detached all the virtual machines from it, right, or removed the virtual machines from it. So those still exist. They're like, I guess, fabric level things that then, in most cases will stop people doing things that they didn't really fully think through, right? So you still do need to think about those things. It will work out the deployment chain in terms of if there was a complex deletion, like do I have to do it in a specific order? So it will work those things out, but it won't fix resources that are outside the scope of that stack, right? So, you may have a scenario whereby, again, your virtual machine is one stack, and then your virtual network is a different stack, but potentially managed by different teams, right? Then you'd obviously need to manage those things, and you will get issues basically if it can't do that. And it would basically just go through the deployment process of what you've added, and then when it gets to deletion, it'll basically come up with an error to basically say that's. And if you obviously resolve that issue in the future, then obviously then you can just rerun the stack again over the top, and away you go and clean it up. Yeah.
It doesn't roll back. Anything that's done if it's an error?
It doesn't roll back. It doesn't roll back. Especially for deletions, rollback is a technically like ARM deployments support a rollback action. It's been there for like, I don't know, multiple years. The reality of actually doing a rollback though for certain actions is not really realistic in a lot of cases. So it hasn't made its way into deployment stacks yet. Possibly it will at some point. But honestly, we're not seeing probably a lot of customers initiate rollback action on resources just due to some of the complexities that they can involve. Yeah. So looks like we don't have our storage account there anymore. Looks like that's gone. If we go back to our stack, we should see what's happened. So basically it's sort of saying, hey, here are the managed resources that are that are still in the stack. Here are the ones that basically got deleted as part of last operation, right?
Bernie, just a quick one. If you don't specify the delete action, what is the default, or do you have to?
So from the Azure CLI and also the PowerShell, then it is mandatory. So you have to specify. Strictly speaking, the docs say that it's not required, and I haven't encountered that specific case where it's not required personally, but I would imagine that maybe it's through REST API it's not required. But basically, the default action is detach, which is obviously the safer option. So that's basically what happens if you don't specify anything and the CLI actually allows you to call it without an action. Yeah, so it is basically that particular part is if you look under, again, just under the group create help, of course, it basically is a, and this is also applies for the deleting stack option. It basically is a required, yeah, basically these two are required. Cool. So yeah, so in the case of our removing a resource from the stack, happy days, it's cleaned up, which is great. If we want to know now, go ahead and
Before you delete the stack.
Yeah.
So that's now removed from the stack. So if you reran the command, does that then show remove the deleted items?
yes, if you reapply the stack with no like changes,
No
then
storage
yes,
account.
it won't be.
So
So those
those-
things won't appear anymore.
They'll just drop off because that's
It's not the last
the
action.
last stack. Okay.
Yeah, it'll still be obviously in like access logs and stuff like
Yeah.
that in terms of
Yeah.
the deletions performed.
But this is just being
Right.
nice and showing you
That's
it's
right.
been removed.
That's right.
Like-
There's no like historical view of what a stack looked at a point in time, at least today.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there a way to see whether a resource is in the stack when you're looking at the resource?
Is there a way to see if it's in the stack? No, not today. No, apart from looking at the stack, but not looking at the resource.
Okay.
But there may be an indication though. Go ahead.
The managed tag, it comes from the deployment stack or because you
Yeah, that's good. It's a good call out. So Sebastian has just called out that then like my resource group and my resources have a managed tag. That is not deployment stacks. That is something that I've done. And so what I've done is, you may or may not be aware, is that there is a hidden title that you can add on most resources that support tags. They have to support tags, of course, which most resources do, which will change how the Azure portal displays those resources and effectively will put the title in curly brackets. It's used mostly for resources that are GUIDs, like certain resources will come out as a GUID, and so it's used there, but you can actually use it on most resources. And so in this particular case here, I've just made my life easy so I can clearly see, hey, this was deployed via a stack or not, right? But that's how you do it. Any other questions?
Well, if you did a stack at the resource group level, that stack would just appear as a resource in the resource group, right?
Yeah, so if that's right. So if you created the deployment stack at the resource group scope,
Yes.
then it would be a child resource of the resource group. And does it display in the general overview? I don't think it does. Just like technically it's there, but I don't think the Azure portal shows it there. See if it does. It's a good question, but it,
Well, it's subscription, right?
it might do. It might do. So if I go into overview, wherever that is, or resources, and by type, yeah.
stack. No, yeah. So I don't think it shows it there, just like it doesn't show deployments there normally. But it does show it obviously underneath that tab.
And on that tab as well, like on the
that's right. At each scope where you can deploy a deployment stack is also this additional tab now, or part of the blade.
okay.
Cool.
The parent scope statement you just in the previous slide.
Yes.
At this level, you will deploy to a resource level.
Yeah. So you could deploy the stack at the resource group level. I've just chosen because I wanted to create the resource group, and also manage the stack at the higher level, create the stack at the subscription level to deploy the resource group and the resources underneath it.
Is that in case you had multiple resource groups in that subscription that you wanted to have that stack across?
Well, so it's just more so like most subscriptions have multiple resource groups, right?
Yep.
And so a challenge that you have, like under Azure landing zones, which I won't get into detail for the people who are less familiar, but basically a general concept is that we go ahead and have a subscription, and we generally have similar workloads or things in a subscription, and we sort of package that up like an application or a group of applications together in a landing zone. So like generally at that level there, you are deploying a workload across a subscription, and like other workloads often will go into other subscriptions, certainly like core networking and things like that.
Yeah.
You could deploy a stack at a resource group level, but more and more often, organizations really need to create the resource groups and the resources underneath them, as opposed to pre-creating the resource group through some other process and then just deploying into a resource group.
Oh, interesting. You find that essentially more frequent?
I find obviously creating resource groups is like a very frequent thing. You don't want to have a third-party team be the gatekeeper of creating resource groups, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just slows things down.
I totally agree with you. You have a room practice that's probably more frequent than not.
Sure. Yeah. So you've got basically with stacks, you've got both. Up to you.
And so if you were just solely deploying to that resource group and only that resource group,
yeah,
then in that scenario, the stack going into that resource group would make sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Cool. Awesome. So let's go ahead and deploy our stack. That's what we wanted to do. So if we go back to our stack, it also appears as an additional resource there. So once you actually click through it, you can actually find it as a recently visited stack item. But let's go ahead and delete it now. And so when we delete it, because delete is an operation itself, it'll actually ask you at that time if you're doing it through the pod, or you would obviously just go ahead and run the AZ stack delete command, right? And do it at that. But again, you can sort of see you get similar options when you're going ahead and deleting. And there's also a review. This is what's going to be deleted, and here's the results that are going to be deleted as a result, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to go ahead and do that just so that then you can see that disappear. But yeah, essentially that's what's going to happen, right?
Oh, sorry, that's deleted not only the stack, but all the resources assigned to that stack.
Right.
And there was an option in there to just choose to unmanage.
Yeah, if I wanted to detach, I could do that.
Yeah.
But in this case here, we're going to get rid of it as well, and the stack and everything in it.
So those actions show up in like the deployment history or anything like that?
Yep. So normal. So they're this part of normal ARM, so they will appear in terms of this. This is because the resource group's not going to be there anymore. You're not going to be able to see it, but we will be able to see stuff in the activity log to say, hey, this person, Bernie, deleted all these things as a result. Right?
So potentially a hypothetical would be if you have a resource group and you have that resource groups for a single purpose, but there's sort of core resources and optional resources and another sort of classification of resources. I could have 3 stacks and then choose to delete one of the stacks to remove those resources.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So you can be, again, in this particular case here, like, again, I've sort of kept it. I'll show you a more complicated example in a sec, but I sort of chose to keep it simple because, again, it's always a good place to start. It's simple. All my stacks align to the resource groups that I've got, right? So I've got a stack for every resource group, and every resource group has a stack, right? Yeah, but basically you can have resources from a stack deployed into other resource groups as well, right? Or you may go ahead and, again, if you've got, I think one of the questions that then Wayne had before was around if we go ahead and have a resource group that then has additional resources which are not in the stack, then if I try and delete that stack and delete like the resource group as well, then if I've got resources there that were outside the stack, it will also then stop that deletion process as well. So again, it tries to keep safety. Obviously, that will then, come up with a deployment issue, but you can then go ahead and rerun the deployment later once you resolve that issue, either by pulling that resource into the stack or basically pulling the other resources that then are going to conflict with it out of the stack or deleting that resource. Cool. So if we go back, we should hopefully probably not have a resource group anymore, which we don't. And of course now, because I just deleted it in the portal, I could again go ahead now and then run my command, and my stack comes back, right? So yeah, so that's a bit of an idea. Let's go into the next bit though, because again, it gets even more interesting. We also then have protecting managed resources. So basically, again, we're talking about what we have in Pizza. There used to be this thing in Azure called Blueprints. It was in preview. It never made it out of preview. And I guess the deployment stacks has actually been around for a long time, but it hasn't been to the public it took quite a long time to go through its development cycle to, again, quite a fair bit of consultation to try and get how it works, working with customers in a way that wasn't going to break how they run, right? Which is why now you don't have to define a deployment stack resource. It's pretty well just a deployment, just a different way of doing the same thing, right? And so one of the features that people really loved about Blueprints was the fact that you could create a deny setting. And so similar thing, it basically happens under deployment stacks as well. So we deploy a stack, and then we don't have to, but we can choose to also then protect those resources with a deny settings mode. And deny settings mode is a special type of RBAC permission that filters out permissions that you have. So even if you would normally have the action to perform, such as deleting a virtual machine or something like that, if that virtual machine is protected by a deny settings, then you won't have that permissions. But
Stem from ClickOps.
yeah, so again, so it really creates this scenario whereby which has been a challenge for customers for a while. Some teams are doing the thing of, let's go ahead and do infrastructure as code. Fantastic, they're loving it, they're doing everything right, and then somebody else comes along and changes that resource, right? And then there's this change that then nobody really knew about. And if you're using Terraform, then that would have broken your state, and alarms would have been going off everywhere. For deployment stacks, again, it's not going to break the deployment per se, but Azure would have just stamped over the top of it. And in this particular case here, then we would have potentially overridden a change that somebody felt that they made and was going to persist, and now it's gone. So that's really more the issue. And so in this case here, with that deny settings mode, we can basically, have the flag that, hey, this is deployed, it's a managed resource. If you want to change it, that's fine, but you should change it by code, right? Change it by the deployment as opposed to changing it just this one time in the port. Right? So yeah, there's a few different options. So by default, the option is none. But again, it is actually a mandatory parameter from the CLI and PowerShell. There is obviously deny delete, and then deny write and delete. which are pretty well exactly what they sound like. So one of the, I guess, the call-outs is that the deny settings or the deny basically permission doesn't filter out read at all. So regardless of even if you do have deny settings, it won't like stop somebody reading the resource itself. So it's really about those administrative actions, right? More than anything else.
Is that separate to a resource lock, or does it just put a resource lock on the resource?
It is separate to a resource lock.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not the same behavior as a resource lock. It's something that's implemented in Azure quite differently to how a resource lock works.
Yeah.
And you can use resource locks together with it. But it's possible you may find that there may be less times when you need to use resource lock. Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, if you've got a production resource and you don't want it changed or modified in any way, then and there's a few exceptions to what the deny settings currently does today. The deny settings again was something that was implemented before deployment stacks, and there's a few limitations around it. But for the most part, it does what it says it does. Yeah, go ahead.
So if it's two different elements, components, different roles as well. So obviously the action roles that you can add those resource locks also different.
Yes. So to modify a resource lock, it's like the Microsoft authorization namespace, and then it'll be like the specific resource type underneath that to change it. For deny settings, there is a completely different RBAC permission for that, and again, it can be set up separately. So that is actually that permission structure itself is actually rolling out globally. So you might find if you're running in a sovereign tenant, then potentially it's not there at the moment, but it's globally, I'm pretty sure it's out. But basically, yeah, there's a permission structure for it, and it can be delegated out separately. Yeah.
If that's an RBAC permission, can an owner on a subscription go and bypass it?
So like an owner on a subscription could delete the stack.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
But some could you remove that via RBAC permissions?
That's a good question. I think the answer to that would be, could you do the, no, I think the answer would be no. You can't remove the deny permission because basically deny permissions can't be created by a normal RBAC mechanism. They have to be part of a stack, right?
Again, stop the pickoffs.
That's a good question. Let me double check on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's the way, because there's no other way to create a deny permission apart from via a stack, and it sort of has a life cycle of the stack. Yeah.
And the default is none. Is that correct?
None. Yeah.
And is there a way to change the tenant default for this
No.
to the bottom one?
Well, when you deploy your stack, you choose the option, right?
Always do that.
Yeah.
Really, just quickly.
Yeah.
So you can still give someone a subscription owner as an example.
Yes.
Deploy a deployment stack to the management group of that, and they wouldn't be able to touch those resources you deploy for that subscription.
Correct. Yeah.
So you could deploy some mandatory resources to that subscription. And
Yeah.
then you own the same.
That's right.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just thinking resources like, like your service bus or whatever, where your topic might have a topic that's global, but then different deploys might register subscriptions. Can you get in a state, say you're preventing right at the service bus or topic level, but other apps want to subscribe? How does that play here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is so the question is basically for child resources, how does that RBAC deny apply? And it's actually, it's a great question because it actually goes to the heart of how deny permissions are different than normal, like allow permissions and RBAC in general, right? And so RBAC in general is an inheritance model, right? There's no way to block inheritance at a lower level. It just inherits all the way down from wherever you put it. Which is by design to make things easy and clear about how it's inheriting down. Basically, denies don't follow that same model. Basically, normally they only apply just to the resource that you are applying it to. So an example would be if you had an Azure SQL database server, virtual server, and then you had a database underneath it, which is a child resource. You could say, hey, let's just deny the server from being basically deleted or updated, and then you would then still be able to create new databases or delete databases or whatever, right? There is a way to inherit down basically that permission is to child scopes, but specifically it's got some specifics around it. It needs to be a child resource of that parent. So in the case of the SQL server and the database, that would work fine. But if you had like another scenario whereby you had like an extension resource or something like that, then that wouldn't necessarily apply to that, right? Because it's not actually parented by that, but it can be like associated with it. So specifically, if you'd apply a deny, leak, and write to a resource group, then resources underneath that won't automatically inherit that, right? But if they're part of the same stack, then they all have the same action anyway, right? For everything's deployed. But implicitly created resources, like an example would be some Azure resources you deploy, maybe like a proxy resource, like a Kubernetes cluster in the resource, and then it goes ahead and creates an MC resource or a managed resource group outside of that. That wouldn't be affected by because that is not part of the stack. If you look at the stack, it didn't know that those things were there, so they're not part of the deployment history. In terms of that, it's a back-end process that's creating those things separately. So again, those wouldn't be affected by that. Cool. So some key points. So basically the deny is managed by the deployment stack. It filters out permissions you normally get, except for read and lock. So both of those cases. So you can still additionally then go ahead and lock and unlock on top of that deny permission because that's not excluded. You can also go ahead and exclude specific service principals, which is again something that doesn't really behave that way in a normal RBAC scenario. It's applied at permission, it inherits down, you get what you get, right? Here you can say, okay, well, deny, but these service principals or these user object IDs can perform any action regardless. They're not affected by the deny at all, right? So maybe you've got a CI pipeline that you also then want to run separately, but then should just have full reign of being able to change those voices, and that you can do. Also, specific actions you can exclude. So specifically in mine, like I've got EA, which is an excluded action, asterisk actions. So within Azure, there's a number of different like additional things that then are not changing the resource, but then require permissions to do, right? So an example would be starting and stopping a virtual machine. You can't start and stop a virtual machine unless you've got permissions, and it's a /action resource that actually grants the ability to power off or restart or whatever. Similar to join a virtual network to another virtual network through peering, it's basically a join action, or to connect a virtual machine NIC into like a virtual network. So connect a VM to a virtual network. These are all like additional actions that then are performed. And so I've got those excluded. You can be specific about them. In terms of excluded principals, you can specify up to 5, which is a reasonably low number, but it's generally okay probably in the context of how you're using the stack. And you can specify up to 200 actions that then you want to exclude as well, if you want to put that much in there. The last one is it can, like we sort of mentioned before, it can be heralded to child resources, which is pretty cool. So let's have a look, right? And so I've already had that applying for a little while. So I should actually have my resource group back, hopefully, maybe. Or maybe it didn't deploy.
Oh, there's a error.
Oops, I had an error, yes. Let's deploy my stack. And That is the wrong. That's that. That's the reason why. Cool. We'll let that go. But let's have a look at another stack that I already have. Maybe I haven't deployed that one yet. Let's go to this. So we can go ahead and, just click these and delete. Cool. And then you're going to get an action there. In the message, I know it's probably reasonably small for people, but basically it says, effectively, it was denied basically because of a deny assignment. And so let's go ahead and just have a quick look at that deny assignment that then comes down. So again, my stack is deploying the resource group and the resources within it. So if I go to the resource group, you'll see that I have under deny assignments, I do have a deny assignment there. And it's sort of nice. It actually gives you, as part of the description of the deny assignment, it actually gives you, hey, it was part of the stack that this was deployed, and here's the stack that actually created that, which is pretty cool.
Does it show up in like the audit log that they tried to delete it and weren't able to?
That's a good question. I would say no, because it was a failed action. But I don't know the answer to that one. Let's wait a few moments and we can come back and have a look.
Will it kind of stand
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna forget
Yeah, I think there was a lead generated.
Oh, was it?
So maybe
Oh, that's
Maybe.
Yeah.
Who's trying to?
Then you find out who's still there. Find out the ClickOps operators. Yeah.
Oh, no.
So is the stack lives on the subscription level? Would the activity log be on the subscription level maybe?
So so I guess the question was, would the activity be on the subscription level? And the answer is, really, there's just one activity log, and it's just filtered. So really, the only difference between the resource group one here and there is that if I remove that filter. Yeah, like normally an action that's not performed, or as in it didn't actually even start, it just rejected it outright. That wouldn't be a logged action. So I don't expect it to be a logged action, but for me attempting to delete. Cool. So yeah, so obviously I can't delete those resources at that point. If I go to my stack, which hopefully should have deployed now. Cool. I could also go ahead and change one of these as well, right? So if we go to edit, and let's just give it a different display name, except we can't make it too long either. And then save. Again, similar sort of thing, failed line as well, right? Which is what we wanted. It's cool. Yeah. There is, again, this is a documented exception currently. I don't know necessarily when it would be fixed, but it is called out in the documentation that it does not stop you changing tags, right? So it will be fine with that. Of course, once I go ahead and redeploy my stack, it'll smash it again because it'll say, hey, tags that you should have, it'll blow it away as long as they're tags that are managed. But it doesn't, and that's just due to the behavior of the deny assignment, how it currently behaves. But I'm sure in time that will also solve that. Again, if I go to any of these resources as well, then I would also see a similar deny assignment in each of those. What was that question?
Yeah, I was thinking of Terraform state, actually, which there are similarities. There are some actions in Terraform that will amend a resource, and there are some quite surprising ones that will actually delete it and recreate it.
Yeah.
Is that the case here?
No.
No.
So yeah, so Azure, I guess, so in the case of Terraform, if you perform an action that then is a an action that it can't be reconciled by the state engine, then normally it will take the approach of, hey, to be able to reconcile that, I need to delete it and recreate it from scratch again, right? Because there are some actions that just can't be changed at a time, like name would be one, right? But there's other actions as well, which are settable at deployment time only. And if you attempt to change that action, then there's no way to actually do that. So in terms of Azure and deployment itself, it doesn't specifically resolve that particular issue. It doesn't do it like unexpectedly or anything like that, but it also doesn't necessarily like solve those specific actions. So if you have something that can only be deployed at deployment time, today you would comment it out probably in the deployment file, redeploy, and then deploy it again uncommented with actual configuration. Yeah.
Bernie, if you try to do this either here on Visual Studio with Copilot, how easy or difficult it is at the moment?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
So let's say that you want to do the deployment, right? If you do it from Visual Studio, can you just tell it, this is what I want, and would it do it almost to the state where you have it? Or would it have, you know, the standard difficulties at the moment that it's not going to be able to do the deployment?
So I guess deployment stacks, again, is really just changing deploy to stack, or deployment to stack. So from that perspective, it's not super, like, there's not really anything specifically that you really need to think about from a stack perspective for deployment. In terms of could Copilot do it? Probably yes, but again, it's a relatively new feature, so possibly it hasn't been included in that. But I guess you might have seen from like some of my typings, like PowerShell also has had completions, which are pretty good for a little while now. So you can sort of see there that if it becomes a previous command, it'll come up. There is also, if you go ahead and do a new session, I'm pretty sure it should actually come up with Copilot. So let's just give it a go. But I haven't tried this, so we shall see how it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Come up.
See question mark. GitHub
I
Copilot.
think it is
Or
Control-I.
Here and in there.
So we want to use the Azure CLI to deploy deploy.bicep using deployment stacks.
it might be
Right.
No,
Cool.
so that's wrong. So that is wrong. So deployment should be there.
And if you try the same thing in the Azure web version that you have, would it have exactly the same output, or?
It's a good question. Good question.
I love how AI says such
Try
so
and which, right?
I know this for a fact.
Copilot.
I haven't played with Copilot in Azure much yet. Would it be able to generate your bicep files based on a resource group?
It's a good question. I haven't used in the portal for Jello and Bicep. Generally, GitHub Copilot is pretty good at Bicep. Originally, it wasn't, but they have done a lot of work to make it a lot better. So it's pretty good now. In terms of what Copilot in the portal is really good for, is generating custo queries. So if you want to use custo or KQL queries, then it's really good for that. And that is definitely something that works really nicely.
That's good because no one knows how to do it.
Yeah, no one knows.
High priority items first. Yeah. So yeah, that's again. So yeah, again, Stacks is relatively new. It was announced at Build, so hopefully it will come along soon.
Thank you.
Cool. So we were limited changes. That's right. So we tested that. That's fine. Let's just go ahead and have a look at the stack in the portal and just see again those specific options. So you may have noticed before that then for any resource that then gets deployed, it then sort of tells you what's happening there. So you can sort of see, hey, this is the deny status. And then also under deny settings, it'll also go ahead and sort of say, here are the deny settings, excluded principles, excluded actions, and then apply to child scopes false, right? So again, sort of shows you how it was deployed. Cool.
Outputs.
Outputs. So outputs and inputs are just normal like deployments, inputs, and outputs. So I didn't have any in my deployment, but if you had them, then they would be there as well, right?
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That makes it kind of usable rather than trying to troll through the DevOps or whatever, having those outputs in there. I like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it does create, I guess, deployment stacks as a first class object, right? It's generally pretty good at sort of showing you this is what my deployment was, this is what I did as a result, and that's it.
What if you had a secret as an input? Would it mask that out from your inputs there? I'm assuming.
So would it mask the secrets out of the inputs? Yes, but it depends on how you deploy it. So within ARM or Bicep, then you have to declare your parameter as a secret.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then Azure takes special care and it'll not show it in the inputs. It'll just show it as like an empty value, but it's not. And it will not put some additional logs are done through a deployment. It'll exclude those from the logs as well.
And so that will show the Bicep parameter files, the parameters in the parameter file.
Yeah,
for sure. Cool.
It's similar to like in terms of like a normal deployment. Normal deployments have had this for a while, if you look for them, of course. But again, it will be similar to something like this. So this is a deployment, and if I go ahead and look at
much easier to see
the input, again, it would be something similar to this.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so that's my stack. Again, some pretty cool features there in terms of what a stack means and what a stack gives you.
Sorry, and those inputs are at the top level, not the inputs for that module. Like when we're starting to talk about sub-modules.
That's a great question. I'm pretty sure, really, because we don't see any inputs here, this is about the inputs for the actual deployment that you initiated, right?
Yep.
So it'll be the top level, but you can also drill down to the other ones, right? So this wouldn't be inputs of every level. Otherwise, we'd see my inputs.
But so your script had some modules which had some inputs.
That's right.
How do I drill down to
that? By going to my deployment.
Each module should be a deployment A.
Yeah, that's right. Each module is a deployment for sure. So this was my module. So effectively, and that's a good question to lead on to that, because if we go ahead and have a look at my subscription, we're still on my stack, but if we go ahead and have a look, I sort of said in the slides, but you could actually see it here, that if I go to deployment, it actually created a deployment for me. So it actually created these ones here. So these stack RG with then random after it. So you don't really need to manage the deployment itself. You manage the stack, and then the deployments happen underneath the covers. And then within the actual root deployment, then you'll have just deployments for every modules, because that's how that is manifested within Azure. So a Bicep module equivalates to a deployment.
All the stuff is still the same as mods.
Same, yeah, exactly. Which is great, because it means that everything that you used before pretty well works just with stacks out of the box, right? So I just wanted to touch one more thing on the deny permission. So if we go to the actual deny permission itself for the deny assignment, then if we jump in here, it says, okay, what principles, if any, are excluded, right? Which we saw that information from the stack anyway. But then denied permissions, you'll see that it does actually include a few additional things here that then weren't visible. Obviously, asterisk, everything is denied, right? And then that additional read one is allowed. And then if you have locks as well, I haven't tested it, but my understanding is the lock will also appear under there as well.
Can you create policies that impact the users that are excluded? The principals that are excluded? Can you affect that?
So if you had additional Azure policies over the top that would block in an action, but then somebody who's still,
Or sorry, making sure Go blogs can always modify that resource and apply that through a policy rather than through the actual explicit stack.
so Azure policies can deploy RBAC permissions today. So that's fine, but they can't deploy deny assignments. So I guess if you are trying to perform an action that then policy denies you from performing, you deny.
Well, more about like the users that are excluded from being or special. You know, like I was saying, that user can always still modify this resource. You can't assign that through a policy.
You can't assign people like the ability to do deny permissions through a policy, no. Like in terms of automatically forcing people to always be excluded out of it. Possibly you might be able to do a policy that then denies the creation of a deny assignment if people are not in that list of exclusions.
Okay.
But I haven't tried it. I don't know if it works.
Like maybe a modify action that adds them in.
Yeah. No, maybe. I'm not sure. I didn't think so though. Yeah.
Bernie, the deny delete, shouldn't it be in here or where?
No, so the asterisk action is deny all actions, right? But because we're looking at a deny assignment, so it's the action of everything is denied, but then read is excluded, so not action. And then action, because I added it in there, is also a not action.
And the terminology is not great. The not actions, the allowed things.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's basically excluded from the deny action.
Yes, that's right.
Well, actually, right. It's like, what is it? Right.
The action is not.
Cool. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about stacks. There's a few additional call outs which are worthwhile calling out. Some we've already mentioned them to a degree. Implicitly created resources, so resources that are not part of the deployment, but then automatically get created. So one example is Kubernetes clusters that I mentioned before. That also happens with other resources like Databricks and things like that. Another case that you may or may not be thinking about as well would be for private endpoints would create a NIC. Then that wouldn't be excluded from deny action, but also you can't really delete that NIC anyway. It's managed by the actual private endpoint anyway. What if today is not supported? They are absolutely working on it. And the team feel like it actually may solve other issues as well by making it work with stacks. So it's happening, but today it doesn't work with what if. MG stacks. So if you are deploying a stack at a management group level, you can't assign a deny action at a management group scope today, but you can deploy a stack in a management group scope and then use that to deploy a subscription and then assign it a deny action there. Like what we talked about in terms of that, then you may want to put resources into a subscription like default resources that then are locked that are part of the subscription that people can't remove, right? So that can be done. Deny assignments don't support tags, which we showed. And then the delete action can't delete key vault secrets today. I'm unsure whether that is going to be changed in the future, but we have done a lot of work to prevent you purging your secrets and stuff like that and stop deleting. So I'm not sure what the status on that one is, but today it's called out in the docs that doesn't work. So if you are trying to delete a secret, then if you have a secret which possibly you generally don't have, but there are certain cases where you do have it, such as you've used the deployment to get a key, like a secret from like a storage account key, and then put that into a key vault. So then for something else to access it. If you've got those types of scenarios, then you need to basically, when you're, I guess, deploying resources, you want to use detach for those type of scenario. So then if you try to run delete, it will try to perform the action, but then it will fail and it'll just basically say, hey, couldn't delete resources, and it won't continue, right? There is a few other exclusions in the docs as well. These are probably, I think, the most important ones from my perspective, but definitely if you're interested in stacks, check it out, play around with it, provide feedback.
Bernie, when you say it won't continue once it's a delete failure, is that, I don't know Bicep very well, is it procedural as such, or is it I'll do everything I can and only fail on things that fail?
Yeah, basically it will try to do everything it can, but if it's following a dependency chain, if something else if it has removed a resource, but then like another resource was dependent on the key that was there, it would obviously go and do a deletion of that resource first, but then it would get to the key and not be able to progress any further, but you still end up with a resource that's gone, right? And anything else that then that secret was dependent on, like the key vault and potentially other deployments that then are part of the dependency chain, would obviously then not be deleted, because in terms of the ARM resource graph and the dependency chain, they still are required. But other resources that are unrelated to the dependency chain would be cleaned up. Yes.
So, sorry, key vault secrets, are they an actual separate resource?
They are a separate resource, yeah. 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 So you can deploy key vault secrets with Bicep
Independently as a resource.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, you've got to be careful about how you do it, because you don't want to be doing a scenario whereby you've got a secret and then in your Bicep file, you put in the password, right? Because then you've got your password in source control, right? So you don't want to do that. But again, there are specific cases where you may do that by like dynamically populating that secret. Again, you could probably work around it and not do that in most scenarios. Again, use managed identities, but there might be some cases where you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can delete the whole key vault using
You could delete the whole key vault, but
It won't
if Azure believes that then the secret is dependent on the key vault, which it is, then you need to detach the secret first, and then you'd be able to delete the key vault. Yeah, because it's a dependent resource. Yeah.
And sorry, so if I did have that scenario and I didn't care about deleting that secret, can I still delete the other resources and I've just got an additional secret in my key vault? That's pretty useless because it's...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It will. Yeah. But the other thing would be, again, as long as it follows the dependency chain. So it's for deploying resources that's going through the dependency chain, deploy the resource if the other resource that it's dependent on already exists. But then in the cleanup process, it reverses that dependency chain. So if there's something further upstream that was dependent on,
storage account that I'm assigning that storage account key into
that's right.
Vault, that's
exactly.
my Bicep script.
Then the secret would I guess the process would then have a dependency link on that, so it wouldn't clean up the storage account as a result. It would, when it got that far, it would fail. So the solution is update your deployment and detach a secret, and then basically run your deployment in a delete mode.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty big gotcha.
Yep. It's all bad in the docs.
I try and go like every single resource that has a secret, I try and put it in the key vault when I deploy that resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's nasty.
Problems with this then.
I'm gonna have problems.
If it's a new deployment. If I guess if the stack knows about it, then that's when the issue occurs. If the secret is being populated as a asynchronous process outside the stack, then it won't care, because it doesn't have a knowledge of that being the dependency chain.
Yeah, I don't know how to pull out all my secret assignments outside. That seems
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's cool. It's good to know.
Good to know.
And like, so if you went through and deleted all the secrets first in a separate process before you did the delete, would that work?
So
Because previously, just so I've got it right, that would fail. Like in the scenario where my bicep file for all my resources, like storage, SQL, whatever, it's throwing secrets into Key Vault for me, and then I go and try and delete stack, it's going to fail.
Yeah, so you could delete secrets out of action,
Yeah.
but if you delete it like out of the stack,
Yeah.
stack will still know about it, and so it'll generate an error, but it's a bypassable error. There's actually a command line switch that allows you to do that, but for obvious reasons, it does try to warn you about it because you may not intend that. But if you go ahead and do open that. Then there is a bypass switch that then you can use. Bypass stack out of sync error. So this would be the scenario if you have cleaned up a whole bunch of resources outside the stack still thinks they're there. And if they're part of the dependency chain, then obviously it's going to try and reverse those out. And if it can't find them or it can't delete them or whatever, then as a result.
And so if I did the special command to prevent click ops, would that also prevent me running that independent script to delete all the Key Vault secret resources?
It would by default, unless you had to put a deny excluded principles. So if you said deny settings excluded principles, you could then obviously have a principle that will still be able to delete it. Yeah.
Wow, that's okay. Cool.
Cool. So in terms of requirements, so newer versions. Yeah, basically it was GA at build, and I think the next release after build is when it was included for the most part. So yeah, basically you'll need to have up to date to be able to use the stack command, but after that you're good. So recapping, so stacks allow you basically start using your existing bicep and ARM templates, just how you normally would for a deployment in an automated pipeline. But then you can now use some stacks. Automatic cleanup of resources, apart from some cases, some exceptions, and strict modify again, some exceptions, but generally speaking, it works how you expect it to. But definitely play around with it, give it a go. It's a great feature. It certainly saved me a bunch of time. Yeah, I'm starting to see customers roll it out as well. So it's a great thing to try out to definitely improve some of the maintenance that you would have had to do manually before.
Awesome.
So that's it for me. But yeah, thank you.
That's an awesome presentation, and as you know, and most anybody who comes here regularly really appreciate our speakers. And also for those who may not know, Bernie fills a double role. Not only is he a speaker tonight, but he also is our host. But we're not allowed to be here without someone making sure we don't trash the place. And that's Bernie's here every month and staying till 8 o'clock or whenever we go to and keeping up the time. So we really appreciate that. Of course. Yeah. Now, if you noticed when Damien flashed up the schedule for speakers, there is a hole for next month. So if somebody's keen to do something, please let us know. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to me spout on for an hour about integration. Yes.
Regarding that, I might be interested, but I would like to know the audience interest in what kind of topics people are actually interested in to hear about.
Okay, there you have. You have an open invitation. Shout out your
any ideas you want to hear about in terms of Azure, or let's say Azure verified modules, or Azure landing zones, or something with Azure. This just to get a picture maybe.
Those are both great, by the way.
Yeah. So maybe Azure verified modules, Azure landing zones. Do people use Azure verified modules here in the Zoom?
Do people want to use verified?
Yeah.
Yes,
Maybe.
they will want to know about it.
Maybe after your demonstration.
Yeah. Are people familiar with Azure landing zones?
Yeah. Yes, to some degree.
Okay. Okay, then I have maybe I come back to you then.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. There we go. That might be our talk next month.
And is the date moving? So is that colliding with state of origin?
That's the date.
I don't know.
7th of August. Somebody wants to do a Google search really fast.
Yeah, it's very soon. So it's going to be over.
Oh, but you know what it does happen is the Eka holiday comes up in August usually.
But that's like it's only 30.
Yeah, somebody needs to look it up. But it wouldn't be the 7th of August. It would be the 15th actually, because it's the second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday.
So we might have to shift it.
Yeah, it ends up on the 14th. So it's that's probably Eka Day or the day after Eka Day.
All right, so we might keep an eye on the schedule. We might have to shift next month's meeting, but we'll still have one. So
Be a good way to use for me a sick leave. Go to the Echo, come here.
bring the kids along.
Bring the super spreader.
Absolutely. All right, so thanks everybody for coming tonight. I counted about 25. Pretty good. We could fill the room. That's awesome. Normally we have both rooms. All I ask is that if you brought a bottle in here with you or cup or whatever, if you could bring it out, that'd be great. If you